The sowers of discord. The poets come to the edge of the ninth Bolgia and look down at a parade of hideously mutilated souls. These are the sowers of discord, and just as their sin was to rend asunder what God had meant to be united, so are they hacked and torn through all eternity by a great demon with a bloody sword. After each mutilation, the souls are compelled to drag their broken bodies around the pit and to return to the demon, for in the course of the circuit, their wounds knit in time to be inflicted anew. Thus is the law of retribution observed, each sinner suffering according to his degree. Among them, Dante distinguishes three classes with varying degrees of guilt within each class. First come the sowers of religious discord. Mahomet is chief among them, and appears first, cleft from crotch to chin, with his internal organs dangling between his legs. His son-in-law, Ali, drags on ahead of him, cleft from top-knot to chin. These reciprocal wounds symbolize Dante's judgment that between them, these two sum up the total schism between Christianity and Mohammedanism. The revolting details of Mahomet's condition clearly imply Dante's opinion of that doctrine. Mahomet issues an ironic warning to another schismatic, Fra Dolcino. Next come the sowers of political discord, among them Pier da Medicina, the tribune Curio, and Mosca de Lamberti, each mutilated according to the nature of his sin. Last of all is Bertran de Born, sower of discord between kinsmen. He separated father from son, and for that offense carries his head separated from his body, holding it with one hand by the hair, and swinging it as if it were a lantern to light his dark and endless way. The image of Bertrand raising his head at arm's length in order that it might speak more clearly to the poets on the ridge is one of the most memorable in the Inferno. For some reason that cannot be ascertained, Dante makes these sinners quite eager to be remembered in the world, despite the fact that many who lie above them in hell were unwilling to be recognized. Who could describe, even in words set free of metric and rhyme, and 1,000 times retold, the blood and wounds that now were shown to me? At grief so deep the tongue must wag in vain, the language of our sense and memory lacks the vocabulary of such pain. If one could gather all those who have stood through all of time on Pulia's fateful soil, and wept for the red running of their blood in the war of the Trojans, and in that long war which left so vast a spoil of golden rings, as we find written in Livy, who does not err, along with those whose bodies felt the wet and gaping wounds of Robert Guiscard's lances, with all the rest whose bones are gathered yet, Caparano, where every last Pugliese turned traitor, and with those from Tagliacozzo, where Alardo won without weapons. If all these were gathered, and one showed his limbs run through, another his lopped off, that could not equal the mutilations of the ninth pit's crew. A wine tun, when a stave or cant bar starts, does not split open as wide as one I saw split from his chin to the mouth with which man farts. Between his legs all of his red guts hung, with the heart, the lungs, the liver, the gallbladder, and the shriveled sack that passes shit to the bung. I stood and stared at him with the stone shelf. He noticed me and opened his own breast with both hands, cried, "See how I rip myself! See how Mahomet's mangled and split open! Ahead of me walks Ali in his tears, his head cleft from topknot to chin, and all the other souls that bleed and mourn along this ditch were sowers of scandal and schism. As they tore others apart, so are they torn. Behind us, warden of our mangled horde, the devil who butchers us and sends us marching, waits to renew our wounds with his long sword when we have made the circuit of the pit, for by the time we stand again before him, all the wounds he gave us last have knit. But who are you that gawk down from that sill, probably to put off your own descent to the pit you are sentenced to for your own evil? Death has not come for him. Guilt does not drive his soul to torment, my sweet guide replied, that he may experience all while yet alive. I, who am dead, must lead him through the drear and darkened halls of hell, from round to round, and this is true as my own standing here. More than 100 wraiths who were marching under the sill on which we stood paused at his words and stared at me, forgetting pain and wonder. And if you do indeed return to see the sun again, and soon, tell Fra Dolcino, unless he longs to come and march with me, he would do well to check his groceries before the winter drives him from the hills and gives the victory to the Navarrese. Mahomet, 1 foot raised, had paused to say these words to me. When he had finished speaking, he stretched it out and down and moved away. Another, he had his throat slit and his nose slashed off as far as the eyebrows, and a wound where one of his ears had been, standing with those who stared at me in wonder from the pit, opened the grinning wound of his red gullet, as if it were a mouth, and said through it, O soul unforfeited to misery, and whom unless I take you for another I have seen above, in our sweet Italy, if ever again you see the gentle plain that slopes down from Vercelli to Marcabo, remember Pierre da Medicina in pain, and announce this warning to the noblest two of Fano, Messrs. Guido and Agiolello, that unless our foresight sees what is not true, they shall be thrown from their ships into the sea, and drown in the raging tides near La Catolica to satisfy a tyrant's treachery. Neptune never saw so gross a crime in all the seas from Cyprus to Majorca, not even in pirate raids, nor the Argive time, the one-eyed traitor lord of Demesne, whose hills and streams one who walks here beside me will wish eternally he had never seen, will call them to parley, but behind sweet invitations he will work it so they need not pray against Folcara's wind. And I to him, if you would have me bear your name to time, show me the one who found the sight of that land so harsh, and let me hear his story and his name. He touched the cheek of one nearby, forcing the jaws apart, and said, This is the one, he cannot speak. This outcast settled Caesar's doubts that day beside the Rubicon by telling him, A man prepared is a man hurt by delay. Ah, how wretched Curio seemed to me, with a bloody stump in his throat, in place of the tongue, which one had dared to speak so recklessly, and one among them, with both arms hacked through, cried out, raising his stumps on the foul air, while the blood bedaubed his face, Remember, too, Mosca de Lamberti, alas, who said, A thing done has an end, and with those words planted the fields of war with Tuscan dead, and brought about the death of all your clan, I said, and he, stung by new pain on pain, ran off, and in his grief he seemed a madman. I stayed to watch those broken instruments, and I saw a thing so strange I should not dare to mention it without more evidence, but that my own clear conscience strengthens me, that good companion that upholds a man within the armor of his purity. I saw it there. I seem to see it still, a body without a head, that moved along like all the others in that spew and spill. It held the severed head by its own hair, swinging it like a lantern in its hand, and the head looked at us and wept in its despair. It made itself a lamp of its own head, and they were 2 in 1 and 1 in 2. How this can be, he knows who so commanded. And when it stood directly under us, it raised the head at arm's length toward our bridge, the better to be heard, and swaying thus, it cried, O living soul in this abyss, see what a sentence has been passed upon me, and search all hell for one to equal this. When you return to the world, remember me. I am Bertran de Born, and it was I who set the young king on to mutiny, son against father, father against son, as Ahithophel set Absalom and David. And since I parted those who should be one in duty and in love, I bear my brain divided from its source within this trunk, and walk here where my evil turns to pain, an eye for an eye to all eternity. Thus is the law of hell observed in me. Notes. 8. Puglia. I have used the modern name, but some of the events Dante narrates took place in the ancient province of Apulia. The southeastern area of Italy is the scene of all the fighting Dante mentions in the following passage. It is certainly a bloody total of slaughter that Dante calls upon to illustrate his scene. 10. The War of the Trojans. The Romans, descended from the Trojans, fought the native Samnites in a long series of raids and skirmishes from 343 to 290 BC. 10 to 12. And in that long war, Livy. The Punic Wars. Livy writes that in the battle of Cannae, 216 BC, so many Romans fell that Hannibal gathered 3 bushels of gold rings from the fingers of the dead and produced them before the Senate at Carthage. 14. Robert Guiscard. Dante places Guiscard in the Paradiso among the warriors of God. He fought the Greeks and Saracens in their attempted invasion of Italy. Caparano. In 1266, the Pugliese, under Manfred, king of Sicily, were charged with holding the pass at Caparano against Charles of Anjou. The Pugliese, probably under papal pressure, allowed the French free passage, and Charles went on to defeat Manfred at Benevento. Manfred himself was killed in that battle. 17 to 18. Tagliacozzo. In a continuation of the same strife, Charles of Anjou used a stratagem suggested to him by Allard de Valery and defeated Conradin, nephew of Manfred. One without weapons is certainly an overstatement. What Alardo suggested was a simple but effective concealment of reserve troops. When Conradin seemed to have carried the delay and was driving his foes before him, the reserve troops broke on his flank and rear and defeated Conradin's outpositioned forces. 32. Ali. Ali succeeded Muhammad to the caliphate, but not until 3 of the disciples had preceded him. Muhammad died in 632, and Ali did not assume the caliphate until 656. 56. Fra Dolcino. In 1300, Fra Dolcino took over the reformist order called the Apostolic Brothers, who preached among other things the community of property and of women. Clement V declared them heretical and ordered a crusade against them. The Brotherhood retired with its women to an impregnable position in the hills between Novara and Vercelli, but their supplies gave out in the course of a year-long siege, and they were finally starved out in March of 1307. Dolcino and Margaret of Trent, his sister in Christ, were burned at the stake at Vercelli the following June. 74. Vercelli, Marcabo. Vercelli is the most western town in Lombardy. Marcabo stands near the mouth of the Po. 76 to 90. This warning. Malatestino da Rimini, see preceding canto, in a move to annex the city of Fano, invited Guido del Cassero and Angioletto de Carignano, leading citizens of Fano, to a conference at La Cotolica, a point on the Adriatic midway between Fano and Rimini. At Malatestino's orders, the two were thrown overboard off Focara, a headland swept by such dangerous currents that approaching sailors used to offer prayers for a safe crossing. 83. Cyprus, Majorca. These islands are at opposite ends of the Mediterranean. 84. Nor the Argive time. The Greeks were raiders and pirates. 85. The one-eyed traitor, Malatestino. 86. One who walks here beside me. This is the Roman tribune Curio, who was banished from Rome by Pompey and joined Caesar's forces, advising him to cross the Rubicon, which was then the boundary between Gaul and the Roman Republic. The crossing constituted invasion, and thus began the Roman Civil War. The Rubicon flows near Rimini. 106. Mosca de Lamberti. Dante had asked Ciacco, Canto 6, for news of Mosca as a man of good works. Now he finds him, his merit cancelled by his greater sin. Buondelmonte de Buondelmonti had insulted the honor of the Amide by breaking off his engagement to a daughter of that line in favor of a girl of the Donati. When the Amide met to discuss what should be done, Mosca spoke for the death of Buondelmonti. The Amide acted upon his advice, and from that, murder sprang from the bloody feud between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines of Florence. 119. A body without a head. Bertran de Born, 1140 to 1215, a great knight and master of the troubadours of Provence. He is said to have instigated a quarrel between Henry II of England and his son Prince Henry, called the Young King, because he was crowned within his father's lifetime. 137. Asitophel, one of David's counselors who deserted him to assist the rebellious Absalom.